Twitter is showing up.
Welcome to episode 141 of the Half Point Per Podcast. I'm your host, Evan Riggs, joined as always by my co-host, little premature talk there, Dalton Willie, and producer Johnny Fammy. How you guys doing tonight?
What a great opening to a great podcast we're about to have. I'm excited for what content you guys are about to have, and especially what Dalton has to say next.
I really think with some of these pre-production issues we're running into at the podcast, we need to revisit producer Fam's PIP. We put him on last week, and maybe reset expectations.
Hey, we're live on Twitter. That is all that matters. I can actually see that. I love being able to see like on the timeline, live on X. You can click it, you can join. That's cool. We've got a fun one today. We've got running back ranks, we've got tight end ranks, and I think last week we had a lot of good conversations, some guys that we disagreed on. I feel a little bit stronger about some of the running back takes than I think most of the receiver takes, mainly because it's just like running back is still so much more scarce than the receiver and quarterback. So it's just a lot more important to get it right. And people are really searching, I feel like, every year for guys. So that'll be a fun conversation. And we're going to talk a little bit of tight end. Tight end is actually more interesting this year than in a lot of years in the past. But first, Dalton, we are going to get another Sell Us the Pin this week. I hope we're actually going to do what this segment was intended to do this week, but we'll see. Dalton, take us away here.
This segment can be whatever you want it to be, Evan. Just remember that.
All right.
Sell me this pen.
So last year, this player was the wide receiver 19 and finished in the wide receiver 26 in points per games. He was 13th in the NFL in first read target share. His team just added an offensive-minded head coach. And right now, you can buy him for the low price of wide receiver 72 on Underdog. Are you going to buy this pin?
I mean, I feel like I need to know who it is. I don't know if I could just blind resume it like that because it could be somebody who's actually terrible and just finished high. So, no, I will not blindly buy the pin.
Would you buy this pin under any circumstances at the price of wide receiver 72? You're getting a Maserati basically right now for the price of a Honda Civic.
I don't love having to blindly buy. Usually if I were to buy, I'd be able to do some research, know what I'm really buying and getting myself into. Like, I would say, because I know you're trying to blind resume me here, just on the fact that this was a top 20 to 30 receiver in both of those metrics last season. And then, yeah, if you're getting him at 72, it's pretty harmless in the grand scheme of things. But Johnny first, and then Dalton, tell us who the player actually is and see if we change our minds.
This is such a dumb game made by Dalton to where just not a great start by him to where I do not want to buy this pen.
Well, Evan, you bought Adam Thielen. Congratulations.
That's fine. I'm not excited about my purchase, but I'll gladly just kind of leave. You buy like a $5 share in a stock, just kind of leave it over there like that. It's kind of what this would be.
Look, I'm excited about the Carolina Panthers this year. Well, and I think we should all be excited about the Carolina Panthers this year.
I'm not so sure we all should be.
Well, you're a Bryce Young hater. Maybe we'll sell him next week.
Next week, I'm gonna sell the pen, and we'll see how that goes. But I mean, the point is, yes, Adam Thielen is probably underdrafted given what he did last year. Of course, you have the age concerns. You have the Deontay Johnson of it all. Like maybe what's the name of the receiver they drafted last year who was absolutely horrendous?
Mingo.
Yeah, maybe Jonathan Mingo will step up and have a better year. But I mean, Adam Thielen has been a value more often than not in fantasy, and he definitely has a good chance to do that again this year.
Yeah, I think he's a good value. At, I mean, he's super free in underdog right now. You can get him in like round 13, and those points there.
The guy who I thought you were talking about until you said he's wide receiver 72 is DeAndre Hopkins, because that is a Brian Callahan is now the head coach. His price obviously is not nearly that low, but he finished probably around there last year. And we're going to talk about his teammate, the guy in the thumbnail, to start this off at running back, and that is Tajay Spears, Dalton. And just a reminder how we're going to do this. This will be a little bit less of a Dalton versus Evan debate, although some of that will inevitably break out. But this is more of a us versus ADP. Maybe both of us agree, disagree, we split, whatever the case may be. In this case, Dalton, we both disagree with ADP in a positive way. He is running back 34 on Underdog right now. I have him at running back 23. You have him at running back 21. You said you feel like you want to be higher on him, and I kind of agree, but it's just difficult to move him up the ranks any higher than that, given, Tony Pollard's in town now. But why do you think he is cleared down at running back 34, and why do you think he can outperform that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start with he is not getting that second year leap that some other guys are getting, but like on a pure on paper standpoint, he had a tougher road than Jameer Gibbs in terms of competition in the backfield. Obviously, Derrick Henry is better than David Montgomery by a wide margin. And then team perspective, the Titans last year were 31st in run blocking rate. Just kind of my elevator pitch for Tajay Spears starts there. They add the offensive line. They bring Callahan's older or father onto the team, who was an offensive line guru at the Browns, did wonderful things there. But even then, this is the first player in the history of Derrick Henry's career that has like brought Derrick Henry off the field in pivotal downs. And that really excites me about Tajay Spears. Last year, there were only 3 running backs who posted PFF grades higher than 70 in rushing, receiving, and pass blocking. They were Derrick Henry, somehow Tyler Algier, and Tajay Spears. So, I mean, he's in pretty elite company with one of those. But then at the same time, you just look at like his metrics. He was top 15 in yards per carry with 4.5. He was top 12 in breakaway percentage at 30.3%, and that's behind a terrible offensive line. And then he was top 10 in targets despite only playing 45% of the team's total snaps among running backs with 70. He's going to be on the field more. And my other side of this is I kind of think our boy slash nobody's boy, Tony Pollard, is washed. And I'd rather make a bet on Tajay Spears being significantly better than Tony Pollard, who is hitting his tail end of his career. This feels like the Zeke Pollard backfield era of the Dallas Cowboys, where Pollard will frustrate fantasy managers, but Spears is the guy who's going to win you weeks on 60-yard breakaways.
I'm not sure that I agree that Tony Pollard is washed, but what I will say is I don't think he's as good as he was a couple years ago with Dallas. And I think we saw that last year. Maybe he can bounce back a little bit this year. I mean, he just horrendous luck and decision making inside the 10-yard line last season. Obviously, you can't click this, but for anybody, the ranks are in the comments. You can click that link. It's clickable, at least on YouTube. I don't know about on Twitter. But like the thing that's so impressive about Tajay Spears, the entire time that Derrick Henry was the workhorse back, nobody took him off the field. And I know maybe this was let's manage him a little bit more as he gets older, but also Tajay Spears took him off the field. Obviously, he wasn't outplaying Henry, but he took him off the field more than anybody else they've had immediately. Week 1, he's getting trusted in high leverage situations. He is trusted in passing downs as a pass catcher, as a pass blocker, and he's a good runner between the tackles. He has everything you want in a running back outside of perhaps knees that will last more than a couple of years in the NFL. But here's the impressive thing about him. I pulled this stat, I believe, from Ryan J. Heath on Twitter. So Tajay Spears did not play very much on first down last year, and that's obviously because of Derrick Henry. If you remove all first down plays, last season, so just second, third, and I guess fourth down. Spears led all running backs in the NFL last season with an 18.4% target share, higher than Christian McCaffrey, higher than Alvin Kamara, higher than, Austin Eckler in the however many games he played last season. And that is in a Titans team offense that was not very pass heavy. And you look at their new head coach, Brian Callahan, he has basically done a media tour about how much they want to throw the ball this season. I mean, he didn't do we're going to line this running back up at receiver, but he said, we want to get Ridley the ball, want to get Hopkins the ball. We want to get both running backs involved in the passing game. And I think Tajay Spears has the chops to be one of the 3, 4, 5 best running backs in the passing game. And then he can still do it on the ground. So I just really, really like the player. And he pretty much outperformed Tony Pollard in all underlying stats last season: yards per carry, missed tackles forced per attempt, contact per attempt, explosive run rate, and of course, most importantly, perhaps the eye test. He just looks like the better player right now. So I am very in on Tajay Spears. I think the running back 34 price is like a floor outcome for him this season.
Yeah, I think the Titans offense just has to be better. I'm not going to buy into Will Levis, but what I am going to buy into is the idea of him checking down the ball pretty frequently. And I mean, at the end of the season last year, Tajay Spears started out averaging 9.8 points per game. To end the season, he was all the way up to 12.6 in his final 6 games. He just screams like value, and it's not a direct one-to-one comparison, but this kind of feels like a Kyron Williams situation, but we know this player is actually talented, where if he ends up getting 70% of the team's workload, everybody's going to be asking why he fell so quickly in the drafts.
Well, like if they didn't sign Tony Pollard and they just brought in some other like a Gus Edwards or like got kind of a blah second running back to take some work, he'd probably be like the RB13 right now. So like that kind of tells you, I think, what kind of talent that we're talking about. And yeah, like you said, if people are wrong about how this backfield work shapes out, and it is still 70-30, 65-35, whatever, with Tajay Spears being the lead guy, like he could easily outperform early 20s. Like I think where we have him ranked is kind of middle of the road, maybe a little bit above that as far as like expected outcomes for Tajay Spears this year.
Yeah. And there are guys I have ranked above him who I think at this point in his career, he's more talented than. I think he's a more talented back than James Cook, for instance, who I have several spots above him. I think he's more talented than the current version of Alvin Kamara we're getting.
Rachaad White.
Yeah, Rachaad White. I didn't want to be the one to say it, but yes. So if this was his backfield, I think I would have trouble not ranking him close to my top 12 because I think talent-wise, he's close to that in the NFL.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, Josh Jacobs. This is a guy that is it really a year on HPPP if Dalton and I don't agree on Josh Jacobs? His ADP is running back 12. Dalton is very much in line with that ADP at RB11. I actually moved him. I had him at RB6. I moved him to RB7. More on that a little bit later. But I am still, shocker, the high guy on Josh Jacobs. And, I get the concern with Jacobs just from he's been banged up a lot throughout his career. No, like truly major injuries. Like when I say major, ACL, like no knee surgeries I can remember. No like torn Achilles, obviously nothing like that, but a lot of shoulder stuff, hamstring, ankle, whatever the case may be. And then of course he's gotten a ton of touches the last couple of years, but he is still only 26. It's kind of hard to believe that because it feels like he's been around for so long, but he was so young when he got drafted. And he is in just an ideal situation after being in, he and Ramondre Stevenson were in the worst situations, I think, for running backs last year. As far as like, if you just look at highlights from last year of those guys, there are a lot of plays where it's like, this guy had absolutely no chance at all to do anything on this play. So he's going to be in a great offense, the best passing game he's ever played with. He can obviously be a factor there. And then, if there's any doubt that the Packers can draw up an unbelievable run game, like you should not be doubting that at all, because he's going to be in a great scheme. I'm not really worried about Marshawn Lloyd, not really worried about AJ Dillon. Like, I think this is going to be Josh Jacobs' backfield, and he is still a very talented player in my mind.
Yeah, I mean, let me first say, like, I'm not on the Josh Jacobs hate train. I'm still above him on ADP.
Yep, by one spot, you are.
I think the players I have above him, I just trust more positionally. A couple of my concerns with Josh Jacobs, we talked about this last year with Jacobs. Players to receive more than 300 carries their following seasons have really declined, and the people who stand out in that have been just Derrick Henry. For players who get that much workload and then continue to thrive in the NFL career, historically, players past their age 25 season at running back transferring teams has been pretty ugly. Those are like the two concerns off the rip that I have for him. But just digging a little deeper down, I just don't know if he's going to get that workhorse role. I have my ranks tiered, and he's not in my workhorse role. Last year and the year prior, no running back in Green Bay has gotten more than 60% of the snap share on the season. And I don't necessarily believe that's going to happen. And I know you spoke about him being in terrible situations last year.
That could also be like Aaron Jones has been the guy, and so maybe that is a Aaron Jones specific thing where he just needs to be the 60%. He cannot be the 70% because we want to keep him healthy.
I mean, and that could be the case, but I'm going to factor in like the coaching tree here has historically kept that backfield pretty split and mitigated with their concerns. And then just my last concern with Jacobs in this role is I know you talked about how the Raiders were a tough fit for him, but then we saw Zamir White for 4 straight weeks rip off like 100 total yards and touchdowns in that offense. So there's still like a bit of a, is Josh Jacobs not what he used to be factor here, or was he dealing with significant injuries? I do agree with you though. Like Marshawn Lloyd doesn't like really scare me at the end of it, because Marshawn Lloyd's career fumble rate was 0.8. And when I say 0.8, I mean in 80% of his games he fumbled the ball. Like Marshawn Lloyd has a very big ball concern issue, and as a rookie, that's one of the most difficult things to getting your time on the field is to not fumble the ball, especially when you're going against somebody who has been a talented back who can get it done, like Josh Jacobs has. But again, I'm still above him on ADP. They're just guys like Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley, Isaiah Pacheco, and Kyron Williams, who I just think are in better situations, and I have a little more faith in their workloads.
Yeah, I mean Jacobs was the RB18 in points per game last season, so obviously he has to outperform that to live up to my rank or even the ADP. But again, I think that was more about situation, and the fact that he even could be a top 20 running back in that situation, I think, still speaks to the type of player that he is. Okay, this is one that, you know, I've had a tough time figuring out the Devon Achane stuff this offseason, because back in the spring, just all the stuff I was seeing, it's like, man, this guy is going to be way, way, way too high. Like, he is going to be my number one bust. And now I still feel like, on Underdog, he is the RB7, but just looked around at some other just individual ranks of people, and he is not really that high on a lot of ranks. So maybe this will come down more into the neighborhood of where we have him. But right now, RB15 for me, RB12 for you, Dalton. You pointed this out on Twitter. We got just the classic, we're putting this guy in the slot, we're going to scheme him up, get him more touches. Like, Achane is so tough to evaluate because he was not used anywhere close to a traditional running back role, and he probably never will be because of his size, because of because of a lot of things. So he, even more so than like a Jahmyr Gibbs or Alvin Kamara back in the day, is you got to get it done on 8 touches, and sometimes he can. But what are your thoughts on his ADP and your thought process behind where you have him ranked right now?
So I think the first thing I'll say is, because of where fantasy football is going, I kind of understand the moonshot attempt you're making with him with his underdog ADP. I haven't drafted him in my like 18 underdog drafts so far once. But like I get the argument that, this is one of those world beaters where if you're right, you're really right and you're really good about it. I just think there's a really high shot that we're all wrong. Um, I'm going to read you things that people are saying about him that are positive, and then tell you why I don't think these things are very good for him. He led fantasies. He led all running backs last year in fantasy points per touch. In fact, he led the NFL since the year 2000 in fantasy points per touch among running backs, and that's being lauded as like a very good thing for him. And the word regression seems to have fallen out of fantasy football favor this year.
Yeah.
But this is like one of those statistics where regression is one of the most probable things to happen. His fantasy points per touch was 4.8. That means every time you touch the ball, you got 4.8 fantasy points.
Yeah. And like maybe in 2 years, it's just like, okay, this is just who this guy is. But until he proves it for more than 9 games, and really it was more like 5 or 6 games, and like those first couple especially were electric. But until he proves it, like you can't count on anything close to that kind of efficiency.
Yeah. Well, I'm never going to knock a guy for scoring 50 points. He scored 50 points against the Denver backup defense in like their worst outing, and that accounts for 23% of his total points last year.
Yeah.
Also, his fantasy points per touch in that game was all the way up to 12. Like a little bit of an insane regression there.
I do think I remember he had like 12 touches and 4 touchdowns or something crazy in that game.
He also led the league in yards before contact on plays at 4.8. That means this guy was getting 4.8 yards to get ahead of steam going, to get his lanes going. And this is a Miami team that lost both their guards, has a Teron Armstead at left tackle who cannot stay healthy, and overall an offense that I think I'm more down on in both sets of rankings than most. And I'm just not going to buy that this offensive line is going to generate gap schemes like that for him all year long. And I know that McDaniels is a very great coordinator. But the last thing I'll say on this, and we're both down on Raheem Mostert in our rankings too, is that there is nobody else that in this offense except for maybe Jalen Wright, which I also have my concerns about.
I'm kind of excited about Jalen Wright.
But no one here can spell him like a significant amount of time for him to not be on the field. And he's not built to be a player who's going to take 20, 22 rush attempts a game and play 70% of the snaps. And if that's the expectation for him, this could be like a Tony Pollard situation last year where we suddenly realized the reason why he got 12 to 15 snaps or touches per game was because he gets tired.
Yeah.
And if that's the case.
And he's also just very tiny, and you don't want him taking a lot of hits between the tackles.
Yeah. And if that's the case, there's really no like high-end outcome for him except for being the most efficient running back we've seen in the history of the NFL. And that's why I have so many guys ranked above him who, yeah, you might get a 20-touch game and 10 points out of like a Joe Mixon, but the downside for Achane is a 12-touch game and he never gets it going and he scores you 3 points because he never gets a full head of steam. He doesn't get that yards before contact that he's been getting. So maybe I'm an Achane hater, maybe I'm not, but I also am not a big believer that this Dolphins offense can continue what it's doing with their offensive line concerns.
Yeah, like I said, at the individual ranks I looked at, it was more in line with where we have him. So I don't think we're out on the island. Maybe this is, but I thought this was maybe just a best ball thing, but I think Fantasy Pros ADP even had him up around here too. Anyway, real quick, I know it's almost 6:30. Johnny, when you have to leave, just leave your screen on like that. I'll change the scene so you're not on here anymore. Just don't leave the actual studio, otherwise the recording won't keep going. Okay. The thing about Achane is why he was so successful last year is the Dolphins were able to basically make almost all of his running plays into jet sweeps. And it worked for quite some time. But kind of the way it's happened the last couple of years for the Dolphins is that teams catch up to them and figure them out a little bit down the stretch. And what is that counterpunch? Are they able to scheme up a run game where he is, like you said, getting that running head start and not having to run between the tackles, not getting hit not even having to like avoid somebody until he's multiple yards down the field? I think that's a big question. And I just think back to that playoff game. Maybe this is unfair because the Dolphins had very little interest, it seemed like, in playing in negative 20 degree or whatever it was. But he struck absolutely no fear in me as a Chiefs fan, that like they had a very easy time containing him. And again, maybe that's unfair. They completely shut down that entire offense. Chiefs defense was very good, but I think kind of my fear based on that is, okay, if you can get them to have to be a more conventional running team, they're not that scary in that regard all of a sudden. So I have some concerns. And now, obviously, RB15, RB12, like I'm still a believer that he's going to have a very good year, just not to the tune of RB7. And I just think, like you said, people are not taking the potential regression into account. And I think people are really getting carried away with the 49, 26, and 21 points that he had in that 3-week stretch in the beginning of the season. Like, we kind of saw him slow down a little bit when he came back down the stretch. In his last 5 games, he had 2 very good games, 2 20-point games, but he also had 3 that were in the single digits. And I just think that a guy that is so reliant on big plays that we have not, like, I don't think Achane is as good as Alvin Kamara in his prime, as Jahmyr Gibbs is right now. I think Tajay Spears is a better player than Achane. So like, if I thought that this was an elite player, maybe I would be more in line with that RB7. But I think this is a good player in an ideal situation for him, and that's great for fantasy. It just isn't RB7 in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you on the talent. I just also feel like this Miami team needs that like David Montgomery-esque player. The only one that even like fits that remotely on their roster is Christopher Brooks, who does not play for them.
Yeah.
And I am interested to see how they scheme up a guy like Jalen Wright, who only knows how to hit open holes and can't do anything else.
Yeah, I mean, he's kind of the Raheem Mostert replacement, you would think.
But all 3 of those guys have the exact same skill set where
Yep.
they need one big hole and they'll break the game for you. But teams know that at this point, and that's a known factor.
Yeah, and again, they'll have plenty of big plays, but I'm going to try not to get carried away. I mean, I try anyway, but especially with the Dolphins, I'm going to try not to get carried away with how things start, especially if they start really, really well. Because it's like, let's see what happens when teams adjust to this team. Okay, Jahmyr Gibbs, his ADP is running back 4. I have him at running back 6. Dalton at running back 9. And I've got to tell you, I had him at running back 8 at the start of this conversation. I bumped him ahead of Josh Jacobs and Travis Etienne. The more research I did in preparing for the show, he's a tough one for me to rank because I totally get the running back 8 where I had him, running back 9 where you have him. I totally get that side of things. And again, not that this is a huge difference, but this early, a couple spots does make a big difference, obviously, because he finished as the RB9 last year. And you know what? If you're telling me that he's going to have the exact same role and, things are going to shake up the exact same way, I would say I don't think that's crazy. But Dalton, you tell me why you have him at RB9, and I'll maybe give the slightly more pro Jahmyr Gibbs case, but I still can't quite get myself to rank him above guys like Jonathan Taylor or Saquon Barkley, which is what you have to do to have him at RB4.
Yeah, and that's part of the struggle. On my tiers for my rankings, there's a workhorse dealer, and he clearly doesn't fall into that role. And let me start at the top. There are always going to be concerns for me, no matter what the situation is, on a Jared Goff-led offense, just because we've seen the bottom of Jared Goff, and it's a pretty bad outcome.
It is. The Lions seem to be as well set up as you can possibly be around him, and that starts with an unbelievable offensive line, and then, Amon-Ra St. Brown is about as good a receiver as you could pair with a Jared Goff, as opposed to like if he had Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase. Both those guys are great, and they're both better than Amon-Ra St. Brown, but it'd be like, my God, man, can you throw the ball deep to them one time, please? Like, it's perfect kind of on all fronts right now.
Yeah. My concern is that we thought that for the Rams for a while, and then the bottom fell out all of a sudden. So just at the top and this is the same conversation we'll have with Laporta. I don't think it's the same for St. Brown because of the style of play he has, but there is a high level of touchdown equity that kind of propelled Jahmyr Gibbs to this landing spot. and the way he got his touchdowns was very inconsistent.
I was surprised to see he had 10 touchdowns last
Yeah.
year. It did not feel like that many.
And only one of those came within the 20s on a red zone touch, which was the play where David Montgomery famously subbed himself out so Jahmyr Gibbs could rush one in at the 1 yard line. Which is where my concern lies. Like, yes, this is a player who every week can break a tackle at the 30 and take it in. And I believe he'll do that. But to get to that 10 touchdowns that he had last year, he has to do that pretty consistently throughout the season. And then on top of that, if David Montgomery plays a full season, we're back to like a 60-40 split. And back to where you and I last year were pointing out, like people complaining about Jahmyr Gibbs' workload are kind of off base on that call. Like it's perfect for him, even if it's a 50-50 split. That's perfect for this kind of player. He did finish third in RB targets. I think that's a pretty consistent floor he's going to have. I'm just concerned about the amount of workload he's going to get going forward. In the games without David Montgomery, he averaged all the way up to 15 carries a game. The reason for that is in the Atlanta game and as well as the Raiders game, he had 17 and 25 rush attempts. He never saw those with David Montgomery in the lineup, and I don't think he will this year. I don't think he really should. And so I'm just going to put guys above him who every week I know they're on the field for 80% of the snaps, who they're going to be more consistent for me. In best ball, it's a little different of an argument. I do draft a good amount of Jahmyr Gibbs, but that's because his boom weeks are more important to me. But in a redraft league where I need to win every week, it's important for me that sometimes like the Isaiah Pacheco 9 points are more important than the Jahmyr Gibbs 4-point game where he just never got a good look.
So where did you pull the red zone stat? I'm just curious because like I'm on Fantasy Pros, they have a red zone breakout and you can do inside the 20 or inside the 10. And on Fantasy Pros, inside the 10-yard line, he had 20 attempts and scored 4 rushing touchdowns.
It's from Whom the Bell Tolls on Twitter, Jeff Bell.
Well, I'm not sure who's wrong, but that was part when I saw that, because like I said, I kind of, ranked him RB8, and the more I just kind of looked back at his year last year and thought about this year, I crept him up a little bit, and that was part of it. He, on the stat I'm seeing, got a little more volume inside the 10 than I remember, and that is rushes. He also had 1 receiving touchdown inside the 10, according to this. But the thing that's encouraging for Gibbs is that he was the RB9 last year, and that was, again, like you said, people losing their minds about his usage for 4 games. And his volume did go up a little bit, but not a ton for the most part last season. The main issue was he only had he was between 7 and 9 points for the first month of the season. Once he really broke out and got things going down the stretch, he was really, really good. I mean, RB4 after he came back from his injury last season, and all of his games that he had the most volume last year, basically from December on, were all with David Montgomery in the lineup. So that is also encouraging. Like you said, don't have to have Montgomery miss time necessarily for him to get volume. But again, it's not like he's getting crazy volume. But then you kind of look at the negative side. And again, this is assuming that the stats I'm looking at are right, whatever, with the red zone stuff. But he may have had 20 carries inside the 10, but he only accounted for 33% of his team's carries inside the 10. Whereas a guy like Alvin Kamara, because if you just look at the overall NFL standings on Fantasy Pros, he's 19th in carries inside the 10-yard line. So you think, that's pretty good. He's not that far behind a lot of guys, but a guy like Alvin Kamara, not that much ahead of him, but he had 100% of the team's touches inside the 10-yard line from the running back position. We all know Taysom Hill exists. And then a guy like Travis Etienne, who you think kind of in a similar mold, he was about 80% of the team's touches. So all that to say that I can see the RB4 case because that's kind of what he was for half of last season. I can see the RB9 case because he may be a little bit up or down because the volume is not always, the volume is going to be 12 to 15 touches a game. And it really kind of comes down to, is the situation what we think it's going to be as far as offense, how good they are? And then also, is this guy as good as Alvin Kamara was? And I kind of think the answer to that might be yes, but we need to see maybe a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, I would say he's the most Alvin Kamara-esque player we have
Yeah.
right now. And just back on your red zone touches point, that just relates back to my Jared Goff uh, trepidation, which is, if Goff isn't moving them down the field consistently, and I'm assuming Detroit's probably near top of the league in red zone like plays because of how good
Yeah.
their offense was last year. And if that number ticks down, then suddenly like his 33% share of that becomes way less important, because I'm looking at Pro Football Reference just to look at the fantasy pros, and yeah, you're right. On the inside the 5, he had 8 attempts in total as rushes. So for sure, my biggest concern would be them getting back into the red zone. I think this is still going to be a pretty good offense.
Well,
But
and they also they rank second in the NFL in scoring percentage at 66.6%,
yeah,
and that can be a little bit fleeting year to year too.
yeah. Um, so yeah, all that leads into my concerns for him. And the last thing I'll say on this, we're not talking about him today, but Travis Etienne is a guy who, the more I research, the more surprised I am about his ranking, and then versus where we have him ranked. And like, I'm probably going to be more in on Etienne this year than I am on Gibbs, just as a base level. I think they're both pretty talented, and Etienne just ran cold more than Gibbs did.
Well, talk about situations. His situation was not good for a good chunk of last year. I mean, the Jaguars had receivers that couldn't separate against man coverage. I think I heard this stat. It was on Mina Kimes' podcast. You may have listened to it. That Nate Tice was on, and they drafted quarterbacks. I think Trevor Lawrence was like second in some like efficiency stat against zone coverage and 28th against man-to-man coverage, and that was a Jacksonville receivers stat. And they also had terrible offensive line, so it was just
They added Mitch Morse at center, who I think is actually going to be pretty good.
Yeah. So anyway, not to get too off track with ETN. Okay, a guy that is a lot less exciting, but Dalton, I was pretty surprised to see you have him ranked at the RB30, and that is Ezekiel Elliott. ADP is running back 39. That is exactly where I have him. You have him at running back 30. And I don't have too much to say on this. I don't think this is worth like a terribly long conversation, but I kind of think Zeke is to the point of his career where he is, we talk about fantasy anchors, like guys who are too good to drop, too bad to actually be useful as a fantasy asset. Like you start them, sometimes you're happy if they score a touchdown. Most of the time, if they don't, you're not. Not a ton of like trade value because people like he's just such a blah player. I kind of think that's where we're at, and I would just rather take shots on guys like a Trey Benson or a Zach Charbonnet, who we'll talk about, or just some other upside guys like that, where I can see the case for potential like top 20 season if things break a certain way, where I just can't really see that with Zeke at this point, while acknowledging he could be the starting running back for the Cowboys.
Yeah, so the first thing I'll say is the only note I actually wrote down under Zeke was believe. Like there isn't a lot to say. This is, I would say, almost entirely a placeholder. Like if Zeke plays 17 games and finishes RB30, I agree with you. No one's excited, and he probably doesn't provide you a lot of value. But I can,
if he finishes RB30, I will still have no regrets about where he's ranked because like you're getting at the journey. It's like the juice will not be worth the squeeze probably in that scenario.
Yeah, but you know who led the Patriots in receptions last year?
Oh, I know it was him because I looked at his game log, and that those last 4 games, it was like 11 targets, 9 targets, 8. It was like, oh my god, that is the sign of a dysfunction. It's like the Austin Eckler thing that happened for full seasons, except it was 4 games where it was like they are throwing to their running back more than any other player. This is not a good thing.
Yeah, and on that note, all I really have to say is like this pass catching core for Dallas is pretty bad. We're getting like really positive Brandon Cooks hype coming out of training camp, and he wasn't a 0 last year, but he certainly wasn't what he used to be. And then I look at this Dallas Cowboys depth chart, and what I wanted to make sure I did was not rank Zeke like in the top 24 as a placeholder, because and this is really as far as I could put him, because I know he's going to score points, and I know he's going to end up having a week where he gets 2 touchdowns because the Dallas offensive line is too good. And this is a team that's going to put up points. So I can see like the road for Zeke finishing is like RB22 and having some good weeks. But at the same time, I will never go out of my way to draft him, especially where he's at in his career.
Okay, I'm glad we got that conversation kind of out there because that's good context for. I saw the RB30 and I was like, man, is Dalton like really into Zeke this year? How do you feel about like Rico Dowdle or Deuce Vaughn, or I guess they have like Royce Free? Like, do you think any of those guys get involved? Is it both of them? Like what do you think this backfield kind of looks like? Because I honestly think Rico Dowdle is probably close, if not as good as Zeke is at this point.
Yeah, which it's ugly.
Which would be an issue for Zeke if that were the case.
And it might be the case. It is Jerry's world, and Jerry loves Zeke. And I'm sure, and again, we're getting into like deep like coach speak talk here, but like if Jerry goes to Mike McCarthy and is like, Zeke's not getting enough touches, give Zeke more touches, Mike McCarthy's probably going to do it, because if you're looking down the line of these guys are the same player, I'm just going to do the one to make the irate GM happy. And that's really where I come down on that argument. I don't have a lean either way. I do draft Rico Dowdle in like the 17th round on Underdog because it's cheap and I can see the case for him. I'm not going to buy into Deuce Vaughn. He looks like a toddler in pads.
Yeah,
I'm not going to buy into Royce Freeman. He's been washed for 2 years.
I think Vaughn is probably like you give him a couple touches here and there and kind of see what happens. I mean, I could easily see this being kind of like a LeGarrette Blount type of season where it's like this guy had an atrocious yardage season this year, but he scored 15 touchdowns like that.
Yeah,
I would hate that, but it could happen.
It's Gus Edwards. Like last year, Gus Edwards was like RB like 10 or something, and he just scored 20 touchdowns or something crazy.
Oh, God. Okay, Jonathan Brooks, speaking of Dalton's Carolina Panthers from earlier, RB22 is his Underdog ADP. Dalton, you are right in line with that at RB23. I am apparently the low man at RB34, and I just kind of want to start off by saying this, kind of like your Zeke rank, this is kind of a placeholder rank for me. Like, I feel like people need to be reminded this guy tore his ACL like mid-November last year. It wasn't early in the season. We just got an update from the Panthers, I think, last week that said he still has a ways to go. So, we'll see. Does he end up on PUP? Like, how healthy is he through training camp if he's not on PUP? I just have a lot of questions about the health. Now, if you set all that aside, if we get on July 10th, he's good to go. He's out there, every day. He's doing most of the stuff. Like, he's on track for week 1. I'd probably be like, great, like RB 26, 25. Like I would bump him up because I do think he is the better player than Chuba Hubbard. I think he is. Now, whether or not this will happen this year, I don't know, even if he's healthy, because you never know with rookies. But he has the skill set of an every down back, of a workhorse back. But again, just a lot of uncertainty about how he will actually look when he does get on the field because of the knee injury, and just when he gets on the field. I think those are just two factors that aren't really being accounted for at his current price right now.
Yeah, so I'll give you kind of my ranking for him and why it is so high. If I'm drafting a guy like Jonathan Brooks, I understand that I'm not going to get him early in the season and he's not going to play. But this is the kind of player that like we get to November and people start throwing around that really annoying league winner title. Yeah. Because first of all, very excited. The Panthers added way better guards to the middle of their offensive line. They add Dave Canales, who made a player who I think is less skilled than him, and Rachaad White, a very, very good fantasy player. And so you put those down. I think this offense is significantly better this year for a lot of reasons that we'll probably get into when we do the NFC South breakdown. But yeah, if he doesn't play in September, what I'm building my team, I understand that, but I want to have as much of him as possible, knowing that going forward. And this is a team like maybe I'm starting Zeke in September and just kind of eating crow on that for the first couple of weeks. But I believe that he's going to end the season as one of those running backs who he's in the top 15 discussion and rankings when he's getting that every down work, because I think he wins the job. I don't think Miles Sanders would be cut if they didn't pay him what they paid him.
Yeah. I think he'll be the third guy. I think it's Chuba as the second guy. And for however long it takes Brooks to get his sea legs, whether or not it is a month, half the season, or maybe he never does. But I think if I had to bet, eventually Brooks will be the lead guy. It's just how long does that take is really the big question.
And over the last 4 seasons, a rookie has finished in the top 12 for running backs. This is a bad running back class, so it's possible that doesn't happen. But if you're asking me to find somebody who could get there, it would be him. ACL surgery altogether has really improved, and I feel like players are coming back sooner. I'm not gonna book him for a early September return. But even if he plays 12 to 13 games this season, I can see him getting into that argument.
Yeah, but let's keep in mind that a guy like Breece Hall, who was the RB2 or whatever last year, is still the outlier as far as performance for a running back the year after an ACL tear. A lot of times now, again, J.K. Dobbins had a lot of other things happening. You also have Javonte Williams, who is still not.
Well, he also had the same MCL, LCL, ACL tear.
Yeah,
but I also won't pretend to tell you what Brooks.
Well, I mean, Dobbins had to have follow up surgery again, and I don't think Javonte had that. I don't remember, but just all that to say that and this is maybe an argument for him in the future. If he isn't as good as you think this year, don't discount him from being a top 12 running back next year, because it does a lot of times take. Maybe by week 10 he's really good, but it's too late for him to be anything better than a top 20 running back in season long. So just approach with an open mind. He is probably the guy that has the biggest upward and downward mobility in my ranks right now.
Yeah. And if we get to August and we're getting reports that he still can't practice in OTAs, he's going to probably have to come down in my rankings.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
But for now, I'd rather be ahead and try to capitalize on the fact that I think he'll be ready by late September and get him going in that second half of the season where you really need him.
Okay, Zamir White, another young running back that I am apparently low on. I have him at RB33. His ADP is at running back 23. Dalton has him at running back 25. Dalton, give us the pro Zamir White take. You're shaking your head.
I'm not going to lie to you. Until I saw our rankings, I thought I was going to argue it. Here's the thing. I don't even like where I have him ranked. It just kind of gets murky, from running back 25 to 38.
That's exact. Really for me, it's at 22. Let me pull up our ranks here. I have it in the window. Yeah, 22. I have Najee Harris, and that is kind of the start of the tier of guys who are kind of in a committee. Guys above them are too, Tajay Spears. I actually have one below you, have one above, but you could easily consider Spears part of that tier. Guys, they're in a committee, pretty good, but not great players by any means. And I think he's in that tier, but in the back end of that tier for me, I just trust other guys more. But yeah, it's funny that you're the high guy here, but not a believer really in the long term.
This is a stereotypical dead zone running back. We did this last year with Alexander Madison and Ty Chandler, where you and I were very out on both of them. And
think back to Myles Gaskin,
Miles Sanders, even
Miles
there are guys in this tier where it's what we're doing right now is we're looking at that roster, and there is nobody else. I will admit, there's nobody else on that roster who looks good. I like Dylan Lobby. Dylan Lobby's also a pass catcher, but I'm not going to bet that Zamir White suddenly succeeds in an environment where Josh Jacobs couldn't, which is the first bet I'm taking. Second, I am not just going to pencil this guy in for 20 touches a game, which is really what you have to do to hope he gets there, because that's how he got there to end this year.
Yeah, he did it for a month, but it's a lot different doing that for an entire season than in 4 weeks in games that do not matter at all because you are out of the playoff picture. And I'm trying to even think back. The Raiders fired their coach mid-year last year. Right?
Yeah, Josh McDaniels. And there's a lot of coach speak that Antonio Pierce is putting out there about how they have to run the ball.
Let me tell you something. I saw a clip the other day when I was looking up Zamir White stuff. It is the Athletic beat writer on the Pat McAfee show who says, I would not draft Josh Jacobs this year because of how much the Raiders like Zamir White. This was heading into Zamir White's rookie season. Josh Jacobs finishes the RB3 that year. So the Raiders have been pumping this guy up, and he has had 2 years and been relevant for 4 weeks. So I just want people to keep that in mind.
And I mean, even after this conversation, Evan, I'm probably going to drop him under Warren, Connor, Moss, Javonte Williams, and Zeke and Brian Robinson to third. He's getting dropped like 7 spots. There's just like, this is not a player that I will ever take. And if we were, because
I'd rather be too late to the party than get there early and nobody shows up.
Because this isn't a player where people are like, he's actually really talented. The argument is, well,
yes,
he's going to run the ball, and that's the argument. And
I am so proud of you as a Myles Gaskin truther. You have really come around on this.
And if we were like 3 years before this, when there was the dead zone was 3rd and 4th round in underdog and in regular drafts, this is where Zamir White would be going. Now that same dead zone has gotten pushed back to the 5th, 6th because of how wide receiver happy everybody is.
Yeah,
but it's still the same problem. Like, one, the Raiders targeted their running backs at the 7th highest rate last year, and Zamir White, I don't have it in front of me, but I bet you it's under like 12 targets. He's not a pass catcher.
He had, I think, 19 targets.
Okay, I was very close. I really think Dylan Lobby outperforms him on that and gets work pretty early.
And that is kind of what it comes down to. He has to catch passes, I think, to live up to his current ADP.
When you have Gardner Minshew or Aiden O'Connell at quarterback, you need to catch passes as a running back. Because if you're in shotgun and you're back there, they're going to put 8 in the box and dare Gardner to throw the ball. Like, it's
and look, I don't like to predict situation. And that's what people are doing with like he's going to get the ball. There's also they're going to be behind. Can they run the ball 20 times a game if they're behind? And like again, we don't know who's good and who's not. But what I do know is Gardner Minshew has never been on a team that's been the quarterback for a team that I would consider good. Aiden O'Connell never been the quarterback for a team I would consider good.
And that's what it comes down to. So does he learn to catch passes, or does the pass catching specialist they drafted or somebody else on this roster take that from him?
Is Amir Abdullah still there? Like,
he is. Let's not do this.
Like, I mean, I'm not saying he's going to be relevant, but he could just be an annoyance, you know?
Yeah. Well, and that's just the thing is he's not talented enough to take away the role. Like, he's not going to run away with it. Oh, they have Alexander Madison. Oh my God, it's a dead zone running back competition.
They do. And, you know, I've seen a lot of look at how they talk about Zamir White as the guy compared to Madison, who is, quote, RB depth. It's like, okay, man, I'm not saying Madison's going to be better than him or even like close to as good, but I mean, even if Madison cuts into it a little bit, it could be a problem for a guy who, like, I thought Zamir White was an okay prospect, but he was not my favorite prospect out of college by any means. Just like an okay prospect who he is like 96 percentile for, like he is an athlete, but I'm not sure how good of a running back he is.
Yeah, and you're going to have to be very good to succeed with this Las Vegas Raiders team.
Yeah, you're going to have some vision, and we'll see if he has that on a consistent basis.
And you know who's been taking a lot of rushes at practice for Raiders?
Who?
Brock Bowers.
Yep, we're going to get some Brock Bowers run game.
Yeah. And
he had like 5 rushing touchdowns last year at Georgia.
Yeah, and if I'm taking somebody running
that's
the ball,
a great point that I didn't even think of.
Yeah, and again, like, is it going to be every week? No, but I just really don't think he's the answer here for Las Vegas.
Yeah. Okay. On to the next guy. That is Zach Charbonnet, who we have a fair. This may be one of our bigger disagreements so far. His ADP is running back 41, so you're right in line. You know, RB 39. On some podcasts, you'd be the Charbonnet guy. You're above my ADP. I have him at RB 28, and I did my ranks before I looked at ADP, and I was surprised to see him where he is in ADP, and you know, clearly that's where you have him ranked, so it's a pretty popular take. I just want to, before we talk too much about situation or, you know, obviously the Kenneth Walker of it all, just want to remind people that had this guy come out the year that we thought he was going to, he probably would have been the RB1 in his rookie draft class, and instead he was the RB3 or 4 in a loaded rookie draft class. Really liked this guy. Liked him as a prospect. Still like him as a player. It's funny. The pulse of the Seahawks fans on this one was, God, Pete Carroll is an idiot for his lack of usage for a lot of the year, and they did this ride the hot hand thing. And there were games, if you look at his game log, even after he kind of established himself a little bit more midway through the season, there was a game in like week 15 where he had 2 touches. Like, what are we doing? Like, why? So hopefully just some of that stuff is different this year. And again, that's kind of a leap that we can't know. But I think based on the actual skill of the player, I am at least betting that might happen. I do have a clip that I just want to show from Twitter. See if this will work. Yeah, this kind of is what it is on the stream here. Put that in the middle. So, I mean, this is a guy, for his size, he's a big guy. Great cutter, great vision. Like, you don't see guys his size able to make runs like this. Like, I just think this is a really, really good player. And I know Kenneth Walker still there, and it's going to be an up and down season. He is like I'd like to get him as my first bench guy on my team, but I really do think that even if Kenneth Walker has a healthy season, he has like RB2 potential this year. And obviously, if Walker were to miss a significant amount of time, like if you just take Kenneth Walker out of the picture, again, he's probably a top 15 or so running back, because I do think he can be that kind of guy if given the reins a little bit. And I mean, this is an offensive line that was terrible last year, horrendous. Geno Smith was one of the more efficient quarterbacks on first down, one of the least efficient on third down because of that offensive line. And you kind of look at their splits last year, Charbonnet and Walker down the stretch. It's interesting. Obviously, Walker missed a couple of games in that stretch. Charbonnet was the running back 37, Walker running back 29, and would have been higher in points per game, but he's getting that pulled down by injury. And also he got hurt really early in the game where he got hurt. Zach Charbonnet had 1 touchdown last season, or in the 1 touchdown total, and 1 touchdown in that 11-week stretch where he still managed to be a top 40 running back. By the way, Kenneth Walker also had 1 touchdown in that 11-week stretch. So they had like 3 or 4 total rushing touchdowns it's something ridiculous. Inside the 5, it was like 15-6 split. I just think there is some positive regression coming for the touchdowns. And just when I watch what he can do at that size, he's kind of what I hoped AJ Dillon could be. And I'm just going down that road again with a bigger back.
Yeah, I mean, part of this ranking for me is probably PTSD, because I called Kenneth Walker a bust last year, and I pounded the Charb drum pretty hard.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still a believer in the player. Some of this ranking, I have him in the rotational players tier. For me, it's tier 4.
Mm-hmm.
Part of the ranking, I'm really concerned about what Ryan Grubb's offense looks like. He's the coach from Washington they brought in. And the reason for that is we've done this kind of whole spiel before, where a really talented, I'll use that in air quotes, offensive coordinator comes to the NFL and we get really excited about their offense. And the case for that was like Cliff Kingsbury before his third go around in the NFL. People really thought he was that guy. So I don't know what this offense is going to look like. And I mean, it reflects both my rankings. I have Walker lower than you, and I have Charb lower than you. I don't really like this offensive line. You touched on that, so I won't harp on that. And this is a team where I feel like if we get to week 11 and they aren't in a spot to make the playoffs, they put in Sam Howell at quarterback. We start getting weird with things. We start trying new things out. And
please, God, don't put Sam Howell behind another bad offensive line.
So a lot of my ranking is in reflection of him, but some of the guys I have over him, I have Corum and Nick Chubb and Eckler and Jerome Ford, and I have him right in line with Kendre Miller, who's another player I believe in.
Yeah.
And I think I'm ahead of ADP on Kendre Miller as well. But I can't go too crazy with it just because I have so many questions about where this offense is heading. And I don't know if they have the answers to that or if we're going to have the answers to that. And really, Ryan Grubb was a air raid pass specialist. And I don't know which of these 2 running backs is going to fit. I think Charb's the better pass protector.
He's a better pass protector, and I think he's honestly a better pass catcher than Kenneth Walker is too.
But like, I'd be one of the first guys if Kenneth Walker was replaced by Charb as the lead back on this team, or even if it was a closer split. Like, I don't.
I
Think,
mean, that down the stretch last season, the last 5 games or the last 7 games, it was 4 times Charbonnet played more snaps and 3 times Kenneth Walker played more snaps. So it got a lot closer than I think I remembered down the stretch last season. And the reason why I didn't remember it is because Charbonnet didn't have any big games because he was never scoring touchdowns, just no touchdowns.
Yeah, but I could see Charb ended up having like a really good season, being like a top 30 RB, and I don't hate the rank for it. I'm just concerned that like Seahawks aren't going to be that good, and then if Mike McDaniel, who's their head coach, brings in this Ravens philosophy, it's going to be the same of what we saw last year, where like they're all getting touches.
Yeah, it's just tough for me to put guys like a Blake Corum or like a Trey Benson ahead of him because I'm stubborn and I think back to what I thought of them as prospects, and it's like I like Charbonnet as a player more. Like he would have gone ahead of Corum or Trey Benson if he's in. Like he would have been. Here's a good question for you: who would have been the RB1 in this draft? Jonathan Brooks or Zach Charbonnet if you just placed Charbonnet in this class?
Are we tearing Brooks ACL?
Yeah, like everything is the same with
yeah,
Brooks.
Charb would be
like so. I think that's just a tough detail for me to move off of. Now, if he has another uninspiring year this year, and let's say he gets better usage and it's still kind of bleh from a production standpoint, then okay, maybe we start to kind of, change our priors a little bit. But I'm still early enough in this guy's career that I'm just a big believer in him.
You know who's an interesting name on the Seattle running back group?
Oh, no. Are you going to say Kenny McIntosh?
No, that hype last year was so like manufactured by the beat reporters in Seattle. George Holani, who Matt Waldman, a guy we both listened to, was a pretty good fan of. I don't think he beats either of them out, but just interesting if we get into a similar 3-headed backfield like we saw in Baltimore a couple of years ago or last year.
Well, I think we have officially gone as deep as we need to on running back with that pull. Hell of a pull there. Let's move on to my favorite position to talk about. Sarcasm. Tight end. All right. I think where we should start is at the top. And the reason for that is we both have Travis Kelce number 1. Probably not a big surprise. And any other year wouldn't be a surprise. But I don't think that is really consensus. I know it's not consensus to have Kelce number 1. I mean, I think Laporta is kind of the new guy in town right now. I'll just double check here. I have our rankings pulled up right here. So you have, so you're Andrews 2, Laporta 3. I have Laporta 2 and Andrews 3. Let's just start with Andrews, maybe why he's not above Kelce or just why he's, where he's at in your mind.
Yeah, going back 2 years, Andrews would have been the wide receiver 8 in points per game. He was just not fully healthy this year, didn't play full time. I'm still a big believer in Todd Monken's offense. And this goes back to the same conversation we were having earlier with Jahmyr Gibbs, where I know the floor of the Detroit Lions is lower than that of the Baltimore Ravens, Lamar Jackson. And Laporta really, it's not a bad thing, but he got by on a lot of touchdown equity last year.
Yeah, 10 touchdowns.
Yeah. And you can run hot or cold in those every year. But what I know about Mark Andrews is that even outside the red zone, he's just a player who consistently is going to get that ball. And look, Rashad Bateman be damned. He's the.
I'm so glad you name dropped him because I was gonna do the same thing.
Because he like Mark Andrews is the wide receiver 2, maybe 1 on this team to some. And between him and Zay Flowers, I think we have a pretty tight target distribution for where Lamar's going to go most games. And I'm just not going to get away from that. Like Laporta is very good, and I'm not going to take anything away from him, but I would rather bet on somebody who I've seen do really, really great things. And the only reason Mark Andrews doesn't have tight end 1 finishes is because Travis Kelce has been so great.
Yeah. Yeah. I think really you could make the argument for either of those 2 guys, and I'm totally good with it. I think really what it comes down to for me is you have a young ascending player and you have a guy who I don't want to like. Kelce is obviously, 34, 35, whatever. So it's not like I want to ding Andrews for being old, but he is obviously older than Laporta, and more importantly, coming off an injury-plagued season, and just have that little doubt in my mind, like, okay, is he going to be the same explosive athlete after the injuries he just had to his lower body last year? That's all. That's really it. Otherwise, yeah, like you said, it can really go either way, and I think he's in a good spot, Andrews, where it's like Zay Flowers and him, and God bless Rashad Bateman. I still have a little bit of faith, but I understand a lot of people don't. But yeah, he's in a good spot. The thing with Laporta and Kelce, which is where I think the debate probably for a lot of people is at the top right now, is would it surprise you if I told you that Laporta scored 0.1 points more per game than Travis Kelce last year, and that's it?
It wouldn't surprise me, but
I think that would be a surprising fact to a lot of people, because it just feels like it feels like towards the end of last year, as the Chiefs offense was struggling, it was, oh yeah, this is the tight end one. He has taken the mantle. And it's kind of funny, there wasn't really any takebacks after Kelce went 7 for 71, 5 for 75 and 2, not 11 for 116 and 1, and 9 for 93 in 4 straight playoff games. Now he's not going to do that for a full season, but like
just go ahead. Go back to that real quick. He went 11 for 11 against the best defense in the NFL
against Kyle Hamilton. That was the first tight end to score a touchdown on him all season.
And if you go back, and I beg anybody to watch this, Travis Kelce destroys Kyle Hamilton on the best timing I've ever seen for a touchdown. He literally turns around and the ball's there and he gets in the end zone. And this all happens after Travis Kelce finally takes a week off, because I think
he played all year hurt last year,
except for the Detroit game where he got injured literally the Wednesday before the Thursday night kickoff game and didn't play.
Yeah.
And then I am confident, because you can look at his stat percentages, and he comes back and plays 64 and 61 in 2 close games against Jacksonville and then a blowout against Chicago. And he was playing hurt. And the final thing, because it really bothers me, like, I don't think there was much sign of him slowing down. And I think, if anything, adding these weapons makes Travis Kelce much harder to game.
Oh, yeah. It makes his life a lot easier, because if they have a vertical passing game again, then he'll actually have room to operate again, and he can be more efficient. I do think the snap count will go down a little bit for Kelce this year, as they try to manage him and get him to the finish line every year as he gets older and gets more nicks and bruises and whatever. But he'll be more efficient, I think, this year, because last year was an anomaly, and we saw in the playoffs, it's not because of him. It was because of the situation that the Chiefs offense found itself in, because of the receiver position, because of inconsistency on the offensive line, mainly at tackle last season, with penalties and whatever the case may be there. But like,
do you know what Sam Laporta is going overall on Underdog?
Yeah, I wrote this down somewhere, but it's not in my doc. But it's like, yeah, I was gonna say it's like 30, 29. Yeah.
Travis Kelce never went that high.
Well, I mean,
he did have 1 year he was in like the second round.
In redraft leagues, Kelce used to be a first round pick, and like Gronk too.
But we are expecting Laporta to do what Kelce does, and no offense to Laporta, but he's more of a tight end, and Travis Kelce is just like a generational Hall of Fame player.
Well, and you mentioned, like, we've seen no signs of Kelce slowing down. I think we have, but like, that is if you're talking about Kelce now versus Kelce in like 2017. He's not the same guy. Like, go back and watch Kelce run like 7-8 years ago and watch him now. He's clearly not the same explosive guy, but it just does not matter. He produces year in, year out. He still basically had 1,000 yards last season. Like, I would have to go back and look. I am confident he probably had at least 1 touchdown called back last season. He only had 5 touchdowns to Laporta's 10. I'm just not realizing that Laporta had 3 of his 10 touchdowns in the fantasy quarterfinals against me last year. So that's a really exciting thing I just remembered. But yeah, I just think we're a little too soon on this one. Next guy who I think we might be a little too soon on, although we may never get there. I might never get there, with Trey McBride. He is the tight end 3 in ADP, 51 overall. I wrote that one down. We both have him at tight end 7. And Dalton, I'm just really confused with this tight end 3 price tag because, yes, I know he had a great finish to last season. It's very exciting. He's a young player. He showed promise. I like him. He's a good player. But even with all of that said, do you have a guess for what he was week 9 on last season at his position? Tight end what?
Oh my God, Evan, this is hilarious because I have from weeks 8 to 17 he was tight end 6 on my notes. So
Yeah, he was tight end 5 from week 9 on, tight end 6 in points per game. So even while he is getting 8.2 targets per game, which is more than Kelsey got last season, more than Mike Evans got in that weeks 9 through 17 stretch, more than Puka Nakua got in that same stretch. Like when he is getting wide receiver 1 targets, he is tight end 5 overall, tight end 6 in points per game. And now we add Marvin Harrison Jr. We have another year of Michael Wilson, and this guy's going to be tight end 3. I know Kyler Murray should be better than he was. He was rusty for a little bit when he came back, but then was pretty good down the stretch last year. But like, we're really going to elevate this guy 3 guys over what he did for half of last season when he was the show in town.
And that all of this starts when Zach Ertz goes down. And also, you didn't even mention him. They added Zay Jones, who, like, the people that were being thrown balls last year by the quarterback crew for the Cardinals were not good players. And this is like a clear player who's due to not have as many targets. He was 6th among all tight ends in targets. If you are a coordinator for the Arizona Cardinals, are you going to draw up 8 targets a game to your tight end, or are you going to draw it to the 4th overall pick in Marvin Harrison Jr.? I'm not going to buy that he's going to get massive target volume. They were the 9th most run-heavy team when Kyler was there, and they're going to continue to be a run-heavy team. Mm-hmm. The addition of Trey Benson shows that. Kyler Murray's a rushing quarterback. Like,
I mean, James Conner had maybe the best season of his career last year.
And I don't think like where we're ranking him is even that bad. I mean,
tight end 7, he is right outside of kind of the main guys for me.
Yeah, for me, he's one above Evan Ingram. For you, he's one below. Evan Ingram led all tight ends in targets last year.
I was going to say Evan Ingram was like one of the guys that was right in that tier of targets for the last half of the season, but he's done that now for multiple years.
Yeah. And the guys we have above him, like Dalton Kincaid, I can confidently say he could lead his team in targets.
Well, and that's what I literally had that written down. I would love to hear somebody make the argument for now. Could it happen? Of course. They're ranked close enough in my ranks that it could definitely happen. But like, someone make the argument to me that McBride should be tight end 3 and Kincaid like tight end 7 or whatever he is. Kincaid is a guy who had 600, almost 700 yards as a rookie last season, only 2 touchdowns. McBride only had 3, so they both get the maybe they catch more touchdowns argument on their side, except one offense added guys. One offense lost Stephon Diggs and didn't really add it. Like, Keon Coleman is there, but like didn't really add anybody, and they lost Gabe Davis too. They didn't really add anybody who I think is a clear-cut number 1 guy. So like it could be like Kincaid could be the number 1 guy, and the fact that the number 1 target who's a tight end for Josh Allen is being ranked behind the maybe number 2 target in Arizona kind of blows my mind.
Well, and the last thing, because I agree with all that, the last thing I'll say is like it's just as absurd to me that we're putting him above George Kittle. I don't know if you saw, but there was a big Twitter like spat on Meta Underdog Fantasy Twitter about what elite tight end is, and people were making the cutoff like round 5, and George Kittle's going round 6.
Mm-hmm.
George Kittle was a tight end 5 last year. George Kittle every year is really good.
As long as he's healthy, he's a top 5 tight end year in, year out.
Now, is his production like erratic?
Yes.
But is that a thing that you're going to get at the tight end position? Yes. It's just
guess what? If George Kittle scores 3 points, there is a very good chance you're playing somebody who is streaming a tight end who had also 3 points.
Yes. But there's also, and we have not seen this from Trey McBride, the George Kittle that scores 2 touchdowns and goes for 120 yards.
Mm-hmm.
And like from a contingent upside perspective, George Kittle has it, and he's in the exact same situation he was in last year. So all of the guys I have above him, and I'll even include Kyle Pitts, I think are more talented at the position and have better cases to lead or are in stable environments where we know exactly what we're getting out of them as opposed to Trey McBride. And this isn't even like me saying Trey McBride's a bad player. I just think we've gone overboard.
Yeah, this will probably be a guy that's on both of our bust list. I have a feeling just because of the ADP. I'm glad you brought up George Kittle because unless I'm misremembering, look over here. No, make the case for Kyle Pitts at tight end 5 ahead of George Kittle at tight end 6 because that one flummoxed me, and this is a real goofy I'll do it again meme situation if I've ever seen one.
Well, let me just start off with saying I feel like you're trapping me when I just gave like a George Kittle spill, and then you're like, by the way, did you know you did this?
It was perfect because I was already going to bring on George Kittle here. So
yes, my argument. So Kyle Pitts is one of the few. He broke the wide receiver receiving record or tight end receiving record for a rookie. He is incredibly talented. We've learned now that he's had multiple surgeries that went into the season essentially last year. He played pretty hamstrung. This team does not have a wide receiver 2. So when we're talking like a floor outcome, I feel comfortable that Kyle Pitts has a pretty good floor outcome. Last year, what Kirk Cousins did with TJ Hawkinson showed us that like he can support multiple receiving talents. And I am a big believer in this Atlanta offense. Like if we just go back to our wide receivers pod, I'm higher on Drake London than you are. I just strongly believe this is going to be a good offense. And I think, again, the erratic George Kittle point scoring is good for you, but I really think that Kyle Pitts is one of those sneaky players who might have like no bad weeks for you because he's going to be the number 2 pass catcher and finally has an offensive coordinator who's going to dial him plays up where they're not like, hey, by the way, Kyle, you're going to play wide receiver against the number 1 cornerback on the team. And with those, I want to be above market on him and get him.
Yeah, I think the main thing, and I should have mentioned, so I have him at tight end 8. His ADP is tight end 6, so not a big difference there. I just thought your rank of him ahead of Kittle was especially interesting. And to me, like, I have him at tight end 8, and it's really 2 things. Number one, I talked about last week, the Kirk Cousins concerns that I have with the Achilles, which leg he tore it on. That is his plant leg. He is not like Aaron Rodgers needs his legs less for power, and it's the other leg. So that is why I feel a little bit differently about those 2 right now. And then if I had to just give an actual player reason for this, it's really like I know he's been in terrible situations, and a lot of it isn't his fault. But also for a guy who was billed as a generational prospect, even with everything going on there, I just would have hoped for a little bit better out of him these first couple of years. And so I'm just dinging him a little bit because, I know last year he had the injuries, but also like at some point you would think maybe he would kind of find his groove and have a couple of big games here and there as he maybe got healthier, but that never seen. I don't know. I want to see Kyle Pitts do it before I buy in, I think is what I'm trying to say.
That's completely fair. I think
before I buy into the tune of tight end 5 or 6, I have a tight end 8. So like I'm drafting them, I'm starting them, whatever.
Well, the funny thing is, if they're not elite, and you know this about me, and I know you're the same way, we're probably not drafting them.
Yeah.
And this is, again, even with this rank, I'm probably not drafting a lot of Kyle Pitts because I don't draft tight ends in like the 5th and 6th round. But I think the conversation is different if his rookie year where he went over 1,000 yards, he had more than 1 touchdown. Like that was a really unfortunate conclusion. Yeah. And was it this year? The first year he scored a touchdown in America? I remember there was a long running like he'd only scored a touchdown in London for a while.
Yeah, it may have been this year. I don't remember though.
Anybody who's listened knows I've said this about Drake London. Like this team over the last 3 years has had the most uncatchable balls thrown to them, and that changes so drastically with Kirk. Even with Michael Penix at this point, I still think he's going to be better than Rinder, Heineke, and whatever Arthur Smith was trying to dial up on that offense.
Yeah, my concern would be is maybe it is never Michael Penix, but Kirk Cousins is a diminished version of himself. And then so what does that look like? That would be my concern there. Okay, a guy that I think we are going to be drafting a lot of, Dalton, real quickly before we get out of here, is Pat Freiermuth. ADP of tight end 14. We both have him as a top 10 guy. I have him right at tight end 10. You have him at tight end 9. And I guess I just don't really understand the logic of the tight end 14 rank other than he had a bad year last year. So we just kind of have to go off the last thing we saw. He missed a lot of the year due to injury. He had like a game where he had 0.1 points, I think, or something like that, like 0.3 points. He had a bad game or two. Obviously, like he's a touchdown dependent tight end, but he is also a great red zone weapon, so he can make up for it. So he's going to have some weeks kind of like that. But this is a guy who was tight end 8 as in 2022, tight end 13 as a rookie, where it took him the time to be the full-time guy. They no longer have Deontay Johnson. Like they have George Pickens. I think it is very clearly those two as the top 2 pass catchers. I think somebody can make the argument that Pat Freiermuth is the most consistent pass catcher on the team going into this season. And I don't know. I'm just surprised to see his rank lower than previous years where Russell Wilson isn't great, but could it, no Matt Canada, maybe a better court. Like, I just think we could see a not great, but better Steelers offense, and he doesn't have Deontay Johnson there anymore.
Yeah, this feels like one of those ADPs that goes up as people get a little sharper in drafts. Like the first thing I'll say is when we just talk about Arthur Smith, we have to separate Arthur Smith, the head coach, from Arthur Smith, the coordinator. Anthony Firkser was a tight end that Arthur Smith got us excited about. He finished as tight end 7. Anthony Firkser proceeded to do nothing the rest of his career. And this was on a Tennessee Titans team that has a good number of similarities to this Pittsburgh Steelers team. You have a elite number 1 pass catcher, George Pickens. I'll use the word elite a little loose there. You have a really strong run game behind Najee Harris and Jalen Warren, and then you really don't have another weapon on this team until you get to Pat Freiermuth. And that's the first argument here. The second one is Arthur Smith has repeatedly, in Atlanta, his 2 years, the tight end group was the most targeted group on the team. Mm-hmm. And he runs an offense that's very tight end heavy because of the wide receiver situation in Pittsburgh. I think the 22 personnel and the heavy schemes are going to be used more often. And this is we have to be careful about projecting what players do. But this, Pat Freiermuth almost has to come out as being the second pass catcher on this team outside of the running backs, because there is nobody else who I can are we going to do Calvin Austin? Are we going to do Roman Wilson?
Not Denzel Mims. He just got cut today.
Yeah. So it just doesn't make sense. And at a position where you really just need points sometimes, he could be a 9 targets for 7 catches and 30 yards. It's not pretty, but those points are important at the position. And he is the red zone threat on this team. And he was 2 years ago. He just wasn't this year because of injuries.
Yeah, and I think above all else, we both still believe in him as a pretty good, not great, but pretty good tight end in the NFL. Dalton, I think that is going to do it for episode 141 of the Half Point Per Podcast. Give us a follow, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at Half Point Per Pod. Subscribe to the YouTube, search Half Point Per Podcast. Link to those things in the show notes as always. The show is available anywhere you listen to podcasts, Spotify, Apple. We live stream on YouTube every week, now on Twitter or X as well. Thank you guys all so much for listening, and we'll be back again next week.